Get out. You don't belong here. This area is for important guests only. The words slice through the air, sharp and final. For a moment, there's silence, the kind that weighs heavy, thick with disbelief. Eyes turn, conversations falter. And standing there, at the entrance of an event meant to celebrate power and success, is a man who has earned his place more than anyone in the room. But in this instant, none of that matters. The evening had been perfect. The soft glow of chandeliers reflecting off polished marble floors, the murmur of sophisticated laughter, the gentle clink of crystal glasses. This was a night reserved for the elite, the accomplished, the celebrated, the powerful. And among them was a man who had built his empire from nothing. A man who had fought for every inch of his success. A man whose name was on the guest list, not just as an attendee, but as a host. Yet here he stood, blocked by an outstretched arm and an assumption. "Sir, this area is for VIPs only." The words hang in the air, each one landing heavier than the last. And in that moment, the years of hard work, the sacrifices, the victories, they all fade. He's no longer seen for what he's accomplished, but for what someone expects him to be. Before we continue this story, tell us where you're watching from. And if you believe everyone should be treated with respect, click the subscribe button now, like this video, and share it with others. Power is often mistaken for presence. Influence is often mistaken for appearance. And respect? That too is often withheld until proven, sometimes at the cost of dignity. Tonight, one man would experience all of this firsthand in a place where, by all rights, he should have been celebrated. Instead, he was stopped at the door, questioned, and denied entry. Not because of his status, not because of any wrongdoing, but because of something far more unsettling. Meet Jonathan, a name known in boardrooms, in high-stakes negotiations, in the corridors of power where decisions shape industries. A name tied to success, innovation, and leadership. But on this night, none of that mattered. Because before he could even reach the grand hall where his presence was expected, where his seat was waiting, where his influence was undeniable, he was met with rejection. This event wasn't just another gathering of the elite. It was an exclusive gala, a night of luxury, a celebration of those who had reached the pinnacle of their careers. Every face in the room belonged to someone important. But what happens when importance is ignored in favor of assumption? When the way you look speaks louder than the name you've built? Jonathan's story is more than a moment of misunderstanding. It is a reflection of something deeper, a truth that many know too well, yet few dare to confront. And tonight, that truth would be exposed in a way that no one could ignore. Stay with me as we break down the events of this night, the shocking truth behind what happened, and the moment that would change everything. Success rarely comes without struggle, and for Jonathan, that struggle had been lifelong. From humble beginnings, he had built himself up, brick by brick, deal by deal, sacrifice by sacrifice. The man who now stood outside that exclusive venue was no ordinary guest. He was the reason the event was happening at all. Jonathan arrived in style. His suit, tailored to perfection, spoke of sophistication. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, carried the weight of a man who knew his worth. As he stepped out of his car, the valet offered a respectful nod. "Good evening, sir." The cool night air hummed with the distant murmur of music and laughter. The warm glow of chandeliers flickered through the towering glass windows of the venue. Everything about this night felt right. Until it didn't. Jonathan approached the entrance with the quiet confidence of a man who belonged. One step closer to an evening of fine dining, powerful conversations, and the celebration of success. But then, a figure stepped in front of him, a security guard. Firm stance, unreadable expression, an arm raised just enough to block his path. "Excuse me, sir, this area is for VIP guests only." A beat of silence. A moment too long. Jonathan reached for his invitation, prepared to clear up the misunderstanding. But before he could even pull it from his pocket, the guard's tone shifted, firmer now, more direct. "I'm going to have to ask you to step aside, sir." A strange sensation washed over him. Jonathan had encountered resistance before, but this was different. There was something in the way the guard looked at him, something in his posture, a quiet certainty in his assumption. And in that moment, Jonathan felt it. A cold, unmistakable realization. His invitation, his status, his success, all of it seemed invisible. Right now, in the eyes of the man standing in front of him, none of it mattered. He wasn't a CEO. He wasn't a sponsor. He wasn't a leader in his industry. He was just a man being told he didn't belong. And in that instant, everything changed. A misunderstanding. That's what Jonathan thought, what he wanted to believe. He had been to events like this before, had seen security guards double-check lists, pause to confirm names. It was routine, an extra layer of caution to maintain exclusivity. He understood that. But this wasn't that. Jonathan extended a polite smile, the kind that comes naturally to a man used to conducting himself with grace. "I know," he said smoothly, nodding toward the entrance. "I'm supposed to be here." The guard didn't move. His expression didn't shift. Instead, his posture stiffened slightly, his eyes scanning Jonathan in a way that was far too familiar. A slow, assessing look that had nothing to do with guest lists or security protocols. "I don't think so. Step back." The words were cold, unwavering, and they carried the weight of something Jonathan had encountered before, something unspoken but painfully clear. For the first time that evening, the warmth of the celebration inside felt distant. The laughter and conversation, the glow of the chandeliers. It was all happening just beyond the doorway, a doorway that, at this moment, felt impossibly far away. Jonathan reached into his pocket, fingers brushing against the invitation, the official proof that his presence wasn't just expected, it was required. But even as he prepared to present it, something about the way the guard stood, the certainty in his rejection, made him pause. Would it even matter? Would the guard even look at it? Jonathan straightened. "I think there's been a mistake. My name is Jonathan. I don't care who you are, sir." The interruption was swift, dismissive, final. Jonathan exhaled slowly, suppressing the sharp response that threatened to rise. He had spent years mastering the art of composure, of measured reactions, of restraint. He wasn't about to let one moment undo that. But still, there it was, that feeling. The silent battle that stretched far beyond this entrance, beyond this event, beyond this one interaction, the weight of assumptions, the invisible lines drawn not by words but by unspoken judgments. It was a battle he had fought before, in boardrooms, in negotiations, in moments where his presence was questioned, before his credentials were even considered. And now here he was again, a guest at his own event, a man forced to justify his own success. The guard's hand hovered near the radio on his belt, a silent warning, a signal that if Jonathan pushed further, this could escalate into something far more humiliating. The choice was his. He could walk away, he could challenge the guard, or he could do something else. Something that would change the course of the night entirely. The seconds stretched, heavy with expectation. Jonathan stood his ground, the security guard unwavering, his hand still hovering near the radio. The weight of unspoken words hung between them. One man standing firm in rejection, the other wrestling with the absurdity of it all. Jonathan could have left, could have walked away, avoiding the quiet humiliation of pleading for a space he already owned. But why should he? Why should he step aside when his name was etched onto the very banners hanging inside? When his presence had been requested by executives, investors, and some of the most influential people in the industry? He inhaled, steady, controlled before speaking again. "I don't think you understand. The guard cut him off. "Sir, if you don't leave now, I'll have to call security." A pause. A flicker of disbelief flashed across Jonathan's face. He wanted to laugh at the irony. Security? Was he not already facing that very thing? A man tasked with enforcing the rules? Rules that right now had little to do with protocol and everything to do with perception. Inside, his employees were waiting. Executives mingled over expensive cocktails. Deals were being discussed, partnerships were forming, and yet, here he was, standing outside, being denied entry to his own event. Just as Jonathan prepared to speak, a new voice cut through the air, calm, firm, and laced with urgency. "Sir, we've been waiting for you." The shift in atmosphere was immediate. The security guard flinched, startled by the sudden intrusion. The words carried weight, not just recognition, but a level of deference that had been missing in the conversation so far. The moment stretched as Jonathan turned to see who had spoken. Striding toward them was a woman dressed in impeccable professional attire, her expression composed yet unmistakably concerned. Jonathan's personal assistant. Her movements were brisk but controlled, her heels clicking against the pavement with a rhythm that matched her confidence. She was someone who knew her place in the world, and more importantly, knew his. "My sincerest apologies for the delay, sir," she continued, her voice smooth and direct, making it unmistakably clear who was in charge here. "Everything is set up just as you requested. The executives are expecting you inside." The guard's face changed instantly. The hard line of his jaw loosened, his stance no longer rigid. He looked between Jonathan and the assistant, realization settling in like a slow-moving tide. It was written all over his face, the dawning comprehension, the unraveling of his own mistake. The moment stretched unbearably long, heavy with unspoken thoughts, unasked questions. "Wait, Jonathan?" His voice was quieter now, no longer filled with authority, but instead with something else. Hesitation, unease. Jonathan didn't answer. He didn't need to. The shift in power had already taken place. The man who had tried to turn him away, the man who had assumed he didn't belong, was now standing face to face with the very truth he had been so quick to dismiss. The very man he had tried to deny was the one who had made this night possible. The security guard's posture had shifted. Gone was the rigid stance of authority, replaced now by something uncertain. The realization of his mistake weighed on him, visibly, his eyes darting between Jonathan and his assistant, his mouth slightly open, as if searching for words that refused to come. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't know." Jonathan studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. He had heard those words before, in different ways from different people. The apology always came after the realization, after the truth had settled in, after the assumption had already done its damage. But what good were apologies when the lesson should have never been necessary in the first place? Jonathan could have let his frustration spill over, could have reminded the guard exactly who he was, could have demanded consequences, but instead he asked one simple question, one that carried far more weight than any reprimand could. "What made you think I didn't belong here?" The question hung in the air like an unshakable presence. The security guard opened his mouth, then hesitated. No excuse would sound right. No explanation would make sense. And that was the problem, wasn't it? Jonathan didn't press further. He had learned long ago that some lessons couldn't be forced. They had to settle in, to sit in the mind, to linger long enough that they couldn't be ignored. He exhaled slowly, his grip tightening slightly around the invitation he had never even needed to pull out. Then, without another word, he stepped past the guard, walking toward the entrance that should have never been a barrier to begin with. Inside, the atmosphere was entirely different. The room hummed with conversations between powerful individuals, people who respected Jonathan, who knew who he was, who valued what he had built. His name carried weight here. And yet, just moments ago, outside that door, none of it had mattered. He had been invisible. And that, more than anything else, was something he would never forget. Jonathan's story is one that many have lived in different ways. Assumptions, silent judgments, doors that should have been open but weren't. The question is, what would you have done? Would you have called out the guard, demanded an explanation, or would you have walked in, letting your presence be the response? Have you ever experienced something like this? A moment where who you are was overshadowed by what someone assumed? Let's talk about it. Hit the subscribe button, tell us where you're watching from, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters, and this is a conversation we all need to be part of.